My name is Aisha Bernblatt, and I am the founder and CEO of Remake. We are hi, I see some waves. We are a nonprofit based here in San Francisco, California. And I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. I really do want to keep today very interactive and, have you guys ask your questions. So I'm going to share a few slides just to set the context of who we are and what we do. So, I didn't really want to talk at you guys. I know it's late. I wish I could be there in person and we could make this really interactive. I thought I'd start by giving you guys a little bit of context on sort of my own career path. I know when you're getting your master's or your MBA, part of your head is around, well, where am I going to end up after? I know Sanchita had shared with me that there's few folks from the public policy school as well, which is wonderful. That's where I got my degree from at Berkeley. So this is very much a homecoming for me. I was at the public policy school, and fun fact, we were actually the first net impact group where public policy and MBA side by side were working on sustainability. So it was, early days of realizing that we need to be working more closely together with business and policy. Right out of grad school, I ended up at BSR, Business for Social Responsibility, which is a big global consultancy that focuses on sustainable consulting. I was there for some 8 years and ended up working with a lot of high street and luxury brands, essentially giving them advice on the design and integration of sustainability into business. I think Ferris Natour and Roger McElrath, if some of you have taken their classes, they are colleagues of mine from BSR that teach at Cal as well. I think for many people, when they're thinking about how to enter the world of sustainability, consulting seems like the best path forward. But to be very honest with you guys, some 8-9 years of making the business case for companies, I got quite tired and fed up, especially with this notion that, executive focus can change. The investor pressure on year-over-year growth always wins. So you could design the best, most beautiful sustainability strategies, but at the end of the day, it was very hard for business to put people and planet first. That was at least my thoughts in working within the private sector. So I then went on to more the multilateral setting and worked with the UN. We had a project called Better Work, which was a partnership between the World Bank and the United Nations, where we essentially focused on building more safe and decent conditions in the fashion sector. My focus was on bringing more brands to the table to sit down with local governments and unions to address working conditions. And one of the things that ended up happening at that time was that Rana Plaza fell down. I don't know if most of you know about Rana Plaza. Show of hands would be awesome, although I can't see you, so I'm assuming, most of you know. But for those of us who have been working on the industry for a long time, there had been a back-to-back series of industrial disasters. Ali Enterprise in my hometown of Karachi had happened, that the Zareen factory fire had happened, and we were part of the team that got to sit with brands and essentially ask for compensation for workers in terms of lives lost and injuries. And that's really, I think, my breaking point, where I realized that, sitting across from Walmart and some of the other brands that were in Rana Plaza and hearing from them that these are not our workers, that too much deregulation in the fashion industry had essentially pushed all risk onto garment makers themselves without very many protections in place. And that is really Remake's founding story. Having worked in the public sector, in the private sector, I wanted to give it a shot within civil society, for there to be a movement, a groundswell of all of us as everyday people, if we want this industry to do better by people and the planet, to give us actionable ways to do that. So fast forward very quickly, I'm going to share with you 3 campaigns that we have recently won, to give you an example of the power of citizens coming together to really make changes happen in an industry. One of the things that's interesting to me, and in the Q&A, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts, is often when I am guest lecturing at a school, whether an MBA school, a policy school, an undergrad school, the first question I get from students is, well, what are the better brands and how can I build a more conscious closet? And one of the things that our advocacy director had posed as a very provocative question that's here on these slides is, would the problem that you're trying to solve with your shopping cart be better tackled by a regulation or some sort of different incentive? And the answer is always yes. And I would love to come back to this question because I think over the last 15 years, in some ways, we as citizens have almost lost our way to think that every solution has to be a market-based solution. And I would challenge us to think of ourselves less as consumers and more as citizens in terms of how to drive social change. So Sanchita had asked, to share 3 examples. The first is our now viral campaign called Pay Up. And, to give you a little bit of context here, at the start of the pandemic, what essentially happened was that fashion brands made the catastrophic decision to not accept goods. These were goods that were already in process or already on ships headed to Western markets. Because what had happened was early in the pandemic, the industry panicked. They panicked because retail stores were closed. They panicked because online sales were sluggish. And so one of the things that the industry has in their contracts is something called a force majeure clause, essentially to say there are major forces at play. And so given the pandemic and not knowing whether or not we're going to be able to sell this product, we're not going to take it. And because the industry operates predominantly on debt with anywhere from 90 to 180 days after goods are accepted for payment to happen, what this meant for workers was essentially catastrophe. Garment makers, mostly the women around the world who make our clothes, already live paycheck to paycheck. They're certainly not making a living wage. And so Pay Up was, I think, a classic example of just how broken the fashion industry is. But today is not really about doom and gloom. I wanted to give you an example of, in the darkest of times, how we can really push for actual citizen-led change. So we within Remake started to carry and hold up on Instagram signs demanding that brands pay up. Instagram as an amplification of protest was interesting for us because it was early days of COVID. We weren't really allowed to be gathering in large public spaces. That campaign ended up going viral for a variety of reasons. There were some celebrities, including the Jenner sisters, that were caught in the fray of not paying up for orders. But there was also a lot of work that went behind the scenes, which included 30 of us as worker-led and activist organizations meeting on a weekly basis to assess which brands were canceling orders, who hadn't yet paid up, having a tracker to publicly name and shame them. But one of the things I can't underscore enough is how important it is for any type of citizen voices to really center workers and their demands. Sometimes when we're thinking about new media or international NGOs or Western-based NGOs, even the most well-meaning ones may not really have the presence and connections with the actual communities that they profess to serve. And so I think for our campaign, it was really important that we were constantly in contact with union and worker voices from Cambodia to Pakistan to Bangladesh to Sri Lanka, really having an understanding of what was going on. From a why we were successful, and we've certainly done a postpartum with other brands, the fact that we were in a lot of mainstream and fashion and business press, the fact that our media campaigning, we essentially became a viral moment where we were all over Instagram, all over Twitter. We had some 270,000 citizens sign our petition. And all in all, Pay Up ended up unlocking 20 billion of the initial 40 billion in canceled contracts from 21 different brands. This included Levi Strauss & Company, headquartered right here in California, Gap, all the way to a number of European brands as well. So in the Q&A, would love your questions, but part of this is really, I think, to show the secret sauce of what works And from my perspective, having tried campaigns that do and do not work, centering the voices of workers, really mobilizing citizens to do something in an easy and actionable way, having research to put in front of brands, because often the onus is on us as civil society to prove that they've done something wrong, and really just making it untenable for them to walk away. So that was an example really of the power of citizen movement, essentially in a very dark time. And Vogue called the Pay Up movement really a new breed of social media activists who are demanding accountability and meaningful change. I will tell you that we really think of social media as a tool and not activism in itself. There's so much that happens behind the scenes in order for a campaign to be successful, whether it's the vetting of research, whether it's the collaboration with civil society, whether it's engagement with brands. And so when I think of, just social media is perhaps what you see, but this really was a beautiful movement. As you look at that collage, there was workers from around the world demanding that we pay up. There's in this collage, Arizona Muse, who's a supermodel who wrote pay up across her face. It was one of these times when we saw solidarity between workers, wholesale and retail workers standing in solidarity with garment workers, citizens really raising their voices, models really using their platform to demand for this to happen. We won. Not every brand paid up, but half of those on our tracker did. Since Pay Up, two other quick examples I wanted to share with you, and then I'm really eager to be more in conversation with you all, is, as I had shared, Remake's founding story is really connected to Rana Plaza. It was one of the biggest industrial disasters of our time. It was certainly a tragedy that could have been prevented. The morning of Rana Plaza, there were so many garment workers who did not want to enter the building because there was huge cracks in the building. It was not structurally safe, but because they were on a rush to get product off to Children's Place and Walmart, their supervisors told them they had to go in. And when that building fell down, it took days to pull people out of the wreckage. But again, from that very difficult time came a very incredible tool, the Bangladesh Accord. Sanjeev, I'd love your perspective on this as well. But in my career, I've seen very few binding agreements that bring brands to the table with global unions to negotiate on working conditions. And that's something that the Accord pushed for. The Accord was set to expire this summer. We worked in collaboration with a lot of union groups and worker groups to push for the renewal of the Accord. In this photo here, right in the center, you see one of our partners, Nazma Akhtar from the Awaj Foundation. She entered the industry as a child laborer, has gone on to become a union leader and really a force of things that we're asking for, right? Pay up, it's like the goods have already been made, just take them. And with the Accord, can we at least assure the structural safety and workers having access to brands when buildings don't feel safe? And the fact that here we are in the 21st century still having to fight for some of the most basic human rights in this industry and others, I think really behooves us to recognize that the lack of regulation is really what has brought us here. And so I wanted to end finally with an example of a bill that we have been working at for the last 2 years right here in California. So Senate Bill 62, the Garment Worker Protection Act, was just passed into law this Monday. Very exciting, momentous day for us after a 2-year fight. And the focus of the bill is very simple. People often think made in America, made in LA, made in California. Somehow, if it's made right here at home, then the product is automatically ethical. But the truth is that California has long been the largest manufacturing hub of the fashion industry. There are some 45,000 predominantly immigrant women that work right in downtown LA. And up to this week, they were making piece rate. So that means for every piece that they were sewing, somewhere between 2 to 3 cents, with a take home pay of $300, well below the minimum wage. So, what this bill does is essentially abolish the piece rate and assure minimum wage. But one of the things that I think for you all, especially as MBA students, that's really interesting, and I think a landmark piece of legislation is that this bill assures multilateral accountability. It's the first of its kind that I've seen. And what that means is that when there is wage theft, if a factory is unable or unwilling to pay, then the brands and retailers are liable to reimburse the workers. This was a really hard fight. The California Chamber of Commerce put this bill as a job killer. Anything that is deemed a job killer often never passes when it comes to being passed into law. We know that Governor Newsom was under a lot of pressure to veto this bill. And, first time around, we lost. And second time around, it was a really hard fight. But again, I think one of the big things was, as you'll see a quote here from Teresa, a worker in the garments district in LA. She's part of the Garment Workers Center. They were very much our allies and partners that led and sponsored this legislation. It was worker-led. Workers said, brands should be held responsible for wage theft because it's the prices that they set that result in this wage theft. The second thing that was really important, again, from passing this campaign was to build a business coalition. All said and done, we had some 160 brands from Eileen Fisher to Mara Hoffman who endorsed this bill. So it was really important for us to show policymakers that this was not just something that labor wanted, but sustainable, ethical brands wanted this to level the playing field. And I know finally you all have been talking about the role of us as everyday consumers. I don't like the word consumer. I often use the word citizen because I want us to get into the habit of thinking of ourselves as citizens and not consumers. The power of our citizen community in getting this bill passed cannot be understated. We sent somewhere between 1,500 postcards to Governor Newsom and first partner Jennifer Siebel Newsom. There was a lot of Cal students that sent those postcards on. We collected some 22,000 signatures. We also rallied along with garment workers. So much like Pay Up, this was a citizens and workers coming together to win.